It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome back to the Douglas Coleman Show, Marc Watson. Hi, Marc. Welcome back.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to have you back. We actually looked it up, and, I thought you were on a lot more recently than this, but the last time you were on was June of 21. So, almost 4 years ago.
I thought the same thing. I went back and had a look because it felt recently, but then I was just like, woo, I was right in the middle of like COVID times.
It was right, yeah, right in the middle of COVID. John forwarded me your email, and he said that you were you camping or something? He said you had no access to internet, or
I'm on the road. I was driving around places, so I couldn't guarantee exactly where I was going to be at that time. Like I wasn't going to be in an office or at my home or anything like that. And so I wish I was camping. I really do wish I was camping. That would be great to do an interview while camping. But no, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to risk not being able to have Wi-Fi access.
Okay, well, that's probably better. And phone is fine. Unfortunately, we're having some issues with this new phone system we just put in. It's not allowing us to call Canada. You guys have been shut off, So
there's some kind of subtext there, I think. I'm not going to.
Well, I don't know with the Trump and Trudeau and all that. Who knows? But for some reason, Canadian numbers do not work, and we're trying to figure out why, or if we have to switch phone companies or. It's a mess. So basically, Skype works fine, at least until May, because then they're going away.
Then they're going, yeah, that's true.
And then we can call the United States, but you can call us. So that's our only option at this point. So I appreciate you calling. So one thing before we get started, I know you have a new book. The new book is called Death at a Wedding. Is that correct?
Yeah, Death at a Wedding.
Okay. What book were you promoting 4 years ago? Do you remember?
I know in previous conversations with you, I was doing Between Conversations, Tales from the World of Ryuujin was one, because I think it was our third conversation, if I recall properly.
I only saw that you were on the show twice.
It might just be the two. I know for a fact that there was Between Conversations, which was my short story collection that I self-published.
Oh, okay. The other one I've got on this sheet here is Death Dresses Poorly.
Right. And so that was my debut novel. That is Death at a Wedding is the unexpected sequel to Death Dresses Poorly.
Oh, I see. Okay. Is a sequel the same thing as when you talk about a trilogy, that it's part 2 and part 3, or is it different?
I would think that it's a bit different. Like I've gone into writing I have a duology out as well, and I knew right away that there was going to be a part 1 and part 2. So when I wrote Catching Hell, it's called Catching Hell Part 1 Journey, and then Part 2 Destination. I never expected to write a sequel to Death Dresses Poorly. So when I did write Death at a Wedding, I just call it an unexpected sequel because I didn't expect to, and I have no plans for what happens with these characters in this world going forward, unlike what I do with when I start writing like epic science fantasy stuff.
But could you call it a part 2, I guess is my question. If you read the first one and then read the second one, is it a continuation? Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is a continuation with the same characters. I like to think that the second one stands on its own. Like I think I kind of hint enough about what happened in the first one to get an idea. So if this one interests you more than the first one, you don't need to read the first one. Obviously it helps, but it's not necessary. Whereas with like my part 1 and part 2 big epic ones, if you don't read part 1, you're going to be completely lost. And that's not true for this.
Okay, so you could really read either one on its own, and
I believe so. Yeah, I think so.
And feel emotionally satisfied?
Yeah, I have a very troubled main character, so I need to make sure that the things he's gone through and the grief that he's experienced is expressed in both part 1 and part 2. So I think I do that.
Are you a full-time writer, or do you have another job as well?
No, I'm not. This is my serious hobby, and I do have a full-time job. I work for an engineering company in their office services department, and I write on the side.
And you live in Calgary?
Yes, that's correct.
How far is that from Banff?
Banff is just over an hour away from Calgary, so I'd be about an hour and 15 minutes or so. Yeah, it's not that far at all. It's a straight line. You just get on the Trans-Canada Highway and you're there in no time.
I also see that you are a poutine aficionado. I had to laugh when I saw that because I've had poutine when I've gone to Montreal, and I used to go quite a bit when I lived in Boston. But I didn't know there were different types of poutine. I mean, the one I always had was French fries with melted cheese and gravy. I mean, that's essentially it, right?
That is essentially it. I grew up with the love of it. I'm originally from Southern Ontario, and I had friends in the Montreal area. So I would go there and I'd have it before it kind of got super popular and kind of took over the national zeitgeist. And when I first had it, it was like fresh cut French fries, fresh cheese curds, and gravy. And you can absolutely have different kinds, and you can have like, I've had some incredibly fancy poutines. One of my favorite ones was like made with gnocchi and like a red wine balsamic reduction sauce and like all these other fancy things. And other ones are just, here's some McCain fries and some shredded mozzarella cheese and some powdered gravy. Enjoy. And then there's all the kind of things in between. Like my son is a big fan of pulled pork on his poutine, and he'll make that like an entire meal and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of options, but it depends on if you want to be a traditionalist about it or if you want to kind of expand your horizons.
Well, I mean, I love this stuff, but it is kind of a walking heart attack. I really would not eat it every day, And luckily, it's nobody has it around here. Nobody's even heard of it. So otherwise, I would eat it all the time because it is delicious. It's wonderful, but
it is. It's Canadian comfort food.
Absolutely. When it's cold out, there's nothing better. But there's no way to make it healthy. In other words, there's no way to do a low-fat version that's going to taste any good. There's no way to do a low-carb version. It's just all or nothing with poutine, really.
It is. It is. You accept what it is you are doing to yourself when you order it off of the menu. You go in with your eyes wide open. There's no subterfuge. There's no, I think that they sprinkled some kale on this one. Now it's a salad. There's nothing like that going on. You go in eyes wide open.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to make it over to the vegan menu.
No. And I mean, all respect to vegans, I wouldn't look at it even if it was. I don't think that's a poutine that I'd want to try.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you on that one. So, Death at a Wedding, can you give us like the whole overview of both books? Like what the story is, the characters, and, just give us kind of a movie trailer. We don't want to give them all away. We want people to buy the books.
No, absolutely. So Death Dresses Poorly, the first one, is an urban fantasy dark comedy about a young man named Ethan. And one day Ethan is approached by a man who claims to be Death, and he wants to recruit Ethan to become the new Death, because in this kind of world that I've written, death is a cyclical role. It changes from person, or not even necessarily person, could be any living creature. And Ethan has just torn himself away from an emotionally abusive relationship that he had with his drug-addicted mother, and he's moved away from her, and he survives a plane crash, which isn't spoiling anything. It happens in the first chapter. And he was supposed to die in that plane crash, and he didn't. So now Death has to try and convince him to take the role as opposed to just giving it to him upon his death. And Ethan doesn't want anything to do with it and thinks he's nothing but a snake oil salesman. So it's Ethan trying to find his own way and fight through the trauma of his youth, and for Death to try and act with interpersonal relationship skills that he doesn't really have. And that's essentially what the first part is. The second one is, I'll just say that the person in the role of Death is more comfortable in that role now and has started to try to find a way out and can't. And while trying to fix these issues that are kind of popping up in the vast multiverse of deaths that they look after, he is invited to a wedding of someone that he holds very closely, and over the course of that, he also happens to meet somebody and ever so slightly starts to fall in love. So it's a story of this particular death going and also learning interpersonal relationships while trying to open themselves up to these kinds of relationships that have never really been something that they've been thinking of. And all while trying to fix these huge issues behind the scenes that threaten to tear reality apart.
Now, according to your one sheet, it says this is a dark comedy. What part of it is funny?
The main characters in all of them have a very snarky and sarcastic wit to them, especially in Death Dresses Poorly, where it is Ethan and the character of Death going back and forth with one another. Because Ethan is incredibly sarcastic. He is very much, and I've made no bones about this, he is me when I was 20-ish years old versus the Death character, which is me what I envision myself to be when I'm in my 50s and 60s. And how those two personalities would get along. I myself have a very kind of, I have a very open relationship with Death. Let's say it's something that Death and I are old friends, and I have always been very darkly witted and very kind of. I've never met a funeral I couldn't tell a joke at, even if it was kind of a dark one. I read the room, I see what would kind of play, and I want to try and elevate the mood and help people get through tough times, or help myself get through tough times with comedy. And I wanted to bring that aspect of my personality into this. So both books are very dialogue heavy. It's very back and forth in the first one, between Ethan and Death, and in the second one, between Death and this romantic interest that they have. And I want to try and keep that, like, we're talking about serious things. We're talking about death, and we're talking about histories of abuse and drug use and all these kinds of things that normally don't go with comedy. So that's why it is a dark comedy. It's difficult to tell those jokes sometimes, and I want to make sure I don't ever go too far. But at least with the first one, I've gotten a lot of very positive feedback from people who might have been suffering through similar situations that say, yeah, no, I completely understand. This is how I got through this hard time in my life, was just I got really wry and sarcastic and made a lot of jokes, and you really brought that through. So it's a comedy in the writing, it's a comedy in the dialogue. It's not, we're not talking like Adam Sandler style comedy here. We're talking about something a lot darker than that.
Yeah, Happy Gilmore wasn't the first thing that came to mind when I saw the titles.
No, exactly.
But speaking of movies, one movie did come to mind while you were talking about this. And I don't know if it's related in the slightest, but I'm going to throw it out and see what you say. Meet Joe Black.
Yeah, and I've had those kind of comparisons to that before. Just like the role of death being personified and put into a situation that they are not accustomed to. And Meet Joe Black is a great example, because Meet Joe Black is death, and death is somewhere to do a job and then unexpectedly falls in love and all the things that come with that. So there are absolutely a lot of parallels. I won't shy away from that. I'm not going to say it was an influence, but they were both stories with very similar beats. And this one is less a romance and more a comedy, though I am still calling it a dark romantic comedy. So I am still leaning into that, because there is absolutely aspects of romance, whereas I would hesitate to say, but I think I can express that Meet Joe Black was more of a like dark fantasy kind of romance. There's not too much comedy in there.
No, it was pretty serious. Although, if I'm not mistaken, Brad Pitt was supposed to be the Grim Reaper.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was real.
Yeah.
That was real Hollywood liberty, because in any portrayal of the Grim Reaper, he didn't look as good as Brad Pitt ever. You know what I mean? That's just not a chance. You know.
No, that's true. And it's a question that I'm sometimes asked, or of course, obviously I'm a writer, so I think about these kinds of things, like who in Hollywood would portray these characters that I have written. And I don't think in my mind, I've ever come up with anyone that looks like Brad Pitt to play the death character in any iteration of my books. It just doesn't look like Brad Pitt.
I mean, to me, that was funny in itself, because, Brad Pitt was obviously very good looking, and there's just no way that I could be convinced that he was the Grim Reaper, because in everyone's mind, the Grim Reaper would be this horrible, sort of disfigured looking, almost invisible in the hood, like, I can't think of somebody that I would want. Marty Feldman from Young Frankenstein. I mean, somebody who something like that. But Brad Pitt would be absolutely on the bottom of the list for who I would pick. So, I mean, in that regard, I took it as funny that they would cast him for that.
For sure. I often think of that movie, and I think, you know what, Anthony Hopkins, who he was there to kill, quote unquote kill in the first place, probably would have made a lot better death in that movie than Brad Pitt did in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, they should have switched
that kind of Grim Reaper type.
They could have switched the roles. Just
Yeah, I think it also would have worked. But the movie does still kind of touch on something, and you're mentioning it now, that I also wanted to go for, and that is kind of reinterpreting what our ideas of who and what death is and how they act. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm writing this because this is how I believe it happens. I don't. This is fantasy, and I've created it. But that idea, and I do make some jokes to this that allude to it in both books, actually, like talking about shouldn't you be wearing like a robe and be carrying a scythe? Do you actually own a scythe? And Death is always like, no, I don't actually own a scythe. What practicalities do I have right now? Like the things like that do absolutely come up. So I'm trying to tell the audience, like, whatever kind of preconceived notions you have of what this character should be, maybe just, hold on to them, but set them aside.
Well, is a scythe and a sling blade the same thing, only the handle's been cut off?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I know what a sling blade looks like. Like what I'm picturing, it sounds like what you're describing, but I'm not 100%.
Well, it was in that movie, this called Sling Blade.
Yeah.
Killed him at the end with it.
Yeah.
I think it's different than a sickle. I don't know. It looked more like a machete to me, a sling blade, but I thought it was like, crescent shaped. So I don't know. I think I'm way out of my element here on this one.
I'm looking at one right now, and a scythe is definitely more crescent shaped, and it's much longer, whereas a sling blade is straight with a hook kind of piece on the end traditionally.
Now the use for a sling blade is typically for wheat, right? They cut wheat with it.
Yeah, very similar to what a scythe is for.
Yeah. So there is a relationship between the two in a vague, sort of esoteric way, I suppose.
They're both somewhat hooked, and they're both used for cutting large swaths of grass or wheat. Similar things to that. They're close.
You could take someone's head off with it if you were so inclined.
Or you can take someone's head off with it. Yes, or they're a representation of death in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we should leave the rest of this topic undiscovered. We'll leave it at that. And on that, we probably should wrap this up because we are quickly running out of time. So the new book is called Death at a Wedding. Has it been released?
It has not. It will be released on April 8th. So you can pre-order it right now on Amazon.
Okay. Last question. Please give out your website.
Yeah, my website is www.marcwatson.ca. That's MarcWatson.
Okay. Well, Marc, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on, and best of luck with the new book. Hope it does well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me again.